You know, Hachi, I still believe that life is what you make of it. I lived fast and furious, never looking back, with no regrets at all. The difference is, now I understand that not everybody can be strong all the time. Because of that, I'm nicer to people now than I was back then. Hey, Hachi, I wonder, are you happy now?
Nana's one of those rare cases where the story starts before you even open the manga, and it does that through its volume covers that tell a very, very small story, but one that's always made me feel really sad. It starts off with one of our two main protagonists, Nana Osaki, having a cup of coffee in a dimly lit apartment alone, and in the next cover, she's joined by her bubbly counterpart, Nana Komatsu, whose presence is enough to brighten up the room, setting a basis for this little story. The rest of their day together is told in little parts through the covers. You see them eating, shopping, going to the movies, singing, and eventually staying the night in a hotel as the day starts to come to an end. All culminating in volume 21 with the two girls walking home together the very next morning, this being the final volume cover released before Aizawa went on hiatus for 15 years! I always wondered if Nana was to come back, where would the two girls go next? And with that came this sad realization that they can't stay together forever, that eventually they have to go back to their normal lives. But honestly, I think it's way more than just that. It's the art. Even if the scene of the girls are happy, the more you stare at it, the more it gives you a sort of melancholic feeling. And it's not just that cover. Every cover gives you that same impression, that after a while, it feels less and less like you're looking at these two girls out on a date and more like you're looking at a memory that's slowly fading away. And it's that vintage-esque feeling of swimming through the memory of two girls that radiates throughout Nana, and something that I'm yet to feel anywhere else. Or another way of putting it, basically, you know that stupid montage of the dead wife at the start of every movie? Imagine an entire manga that feels like just that. And it's not stupid, it's really fucking good. And that is just one of the many, many ways Aizawa has managed to make a story about two girls with opposite personalities, but sharing the same name, trying to navigate their new adulthood lives together, such a timeless piece of media. And you can feel that in the very specific impact it's had. Nana was a cultural phenomenon in Japan during the early to mid 2000s. It got a million different adaptations, from an anime to games to movies to fashion collabs, and selling over 50 million copies worldwide with only 21 volumes, surpassing the likes of Sailor Moon and selling just as much as series like Berserk with only half the amount of volumes, which is insane. And a big part of why it was so popular is it came out in a time where young people in Japan were really struggling, going out into a society that did not want them, this era being known as the Lost Decade, where Japan's economy crashed, skyrocketing prices and leaving many people with no jobs and therefore no clear path to walk. Tie that into the fact that punk rock was becoming more and more popular in Japan during the 90s, idolizing characters like Sid Vicious because of his not give a fuck attitude, and you start to see why a lot of young people beyond just its target audience fell in love with this series. Nana represented their struggles, and with that, a lot of the struggles we still feel today. And it's able to have this impact by giving something that we don't see in a lot of stories, and that's a brutally honest perspective on what Japan was like back then for young people, and more specifically young women. But more than that, what people are actually like in general, because the deeper you get into it and the more you learn about its author, the more you can tell it was written by a person that intricately understands humans and how we function through our emotions. The good, and very, very much so the bad. And it's that combination of things that gives birth to an experience that forces you to see things differently. And it's how that experience was intricately crafted, what that experience is and what you can take away from it. That is what I want to explore in this video today, aka the Nana experience. You see what I did there? Also, I just want to quickly say that I made this video with two audiences in mind: people that's never touched the series before, and people that cry every time they look at a strawberry glass like myself. So if you are a Nana fan, this entire video is for you, but if you haven't, don't worry. The first half is dedicated to very early spoilers in the stories that I promise you will not take away from your overall experience, and when it's done, I'll give you a big fat spoiler warning and a little goodbye letter. And with that out of the way, we have to first understand what makes Nana feel so realistic, because that is not just a throwaway compliment, it is the core of its identity, more specifically uncomfortably realistic, and not in the way you probably think. As I mentioned earlier, Nana's about these two girls with the same name trying to navigate a cruel adult world together from the tiny little apartment they share on the 7th floor in room 707. Nana Osaki wants to become a famous singer alongside her band Blast, made up of Yasu, Nobu, and Shin, but constantly finds herself struggling to move forward because of the attachment she has to her cruel, lonely past, represented in the relationship she has with her boyfriend Ren, someone with that same experience of being a foster child, Blast's former bassist, and now a part of their rival band Trapnest. Nana Komatsu, on the other hand, is this cheerful golden retriever-like girl who was earnestly searching for love. She envisioned her future self happily married and embracing that cookie-cutter lifestyle. However, even though they're both so different, they still struggle with the same flaws, that flaw being this lack of self-love and the need for validation from others, even if it manifests in vastly different ways. Which I think is a part of what makes them build the soulmate-like connection instantly when they meet on the train to Tokyo and later when trying to find an apartment. Because even if they can't love themselves, at the very least, they can love Nana. A beautiful play on the words by the author. And specifically is how Aizawa treats those flaws which separates Nana from other stories. When you think of a story that's realistic, Oyasumi Punpun, Berserk, anything by Shuzo Ashimi are probably the first manga that come to mind, as they all stand out mainly because of their ability to convey these grounded characters, and I would agree. The ability to make a 6'7" monster, a fucking cartoon bird, and very, very, very horrifying woman feel explicitly human is no small feat, but what they use to make their story feel realistic is vastly different. Berserk is built around this horrifying, dark, fantastical world of violence, but what makes Guts feel so human is those small moments and sense of normality it's able to convey amidst it. Guts' smile, his friendship with the band of the Hawks, his sadness, etc. It's almost like the humanity of these moments get amplified by purely existing in those circumstances. Or take Shuzo Ashimi, who uses horror to make realistic relationships, like that of a mother and son, a psychological breakdown of how we perceive everything around us. Or Inio Asano, who uses a cartoon bird who gets darker and darker and darker and darker and darker. But what's so impressive about Nana is that it gives you that same feeling of these unfathomable beings or situations being brought down to our level without the need of violence, horror, or absurd concepts. Instead, Aizawa uses her character's flaws to piss you off. Look, I know it sounds kind of arse, but I think it's amazing and better than anything I've mentioned so far, so just please give me a moment to explain. In most cases of conventional storytelling, a character starts out with a flaw, they go through some sort of arc/event, and then they get over this said flaw. Using another shoujo that I love, for example, in Fruits Basket, one of Yuki's flaws was his inability to be vulnerable around others due to years of emotional neglect. However, after the event of meeting Toru Honda, my goat by the way, he learns to understand his emotions, putting him on the path of learning to be more honest about himself with others. And that format is usually the case with most characters, and a lot of the time, like Fruba, it works really well for the story it's trying to convey. That is absolutely not the fucking case of Nana. Some of these characters, man, they could go through 100 fucking events and still be the same dumbasses. But it's what makes them such honest depictions of real people. The characters retain their flaws throughout the series, struggling with the same issues from beginning to end, which mirrors real human behavior. The biggest example of this, coming from one of the story's main characters, Pink Nana, who I'm going to refer to by her nickname from now on, Hachiko, because something about calling them Pink Nana and Black Nana, I don't know, man, it doesn't feel right. From the very first chapter of the manga, we see Hachi trying to find love in her affair with a businessman called Asano. And as the audience looking in from outside the box, we're aware that he's using her and her naivety because we know he's not going to give her the idealistic love that she's seeking, seeing as he literally has a wife and, well, you know, he's a grown-ass man. But Hachi is a vulnerable 16-year-old girl and at this point needing validation from an outside source. Eventually this ends and Hachi realizes that he was using her but still carries that same naivety and idealistic view of love into her next relationship, and that keeps carrying on throughout the story, event after event, person after person. And this aspect of her character leads to a lot of people finding her annoying. I don't, by the way. I think she's a fucking genius character and I love her, and we'll get into that later in the video. But it's an interesting paradox because it's that element that adds to Nana's realism as a story and makes it so fucking good. Hachiko remaining that way after the many way worse experiences she has after is sadly just the way humans work. That doesn't make us simple, it makes us nuanced. Our flaws are complicated and deeply ingrained into us through our experiences and connections, and change doesn't come through just one moment or relationship like we see in so many stories. And Aizawa quite literally grabs our fat ass heads and forces us to understand this and how it happens when they reunite a few years later in that same first chapter. After that very bad experience she had with Asano, she starts to be romantically involved with Shoji, a friend of Junko that she met during her time at art college. During an argument about Hachi not reciprocating Shoji's feelings, she gets left in the middle of an unfamiliar crowd of Tokyo and reunites with that same businessman Asano, who helps and offers to take her to dinner. Now up till this point, Hachi hates him. It's been a few years, so she's finally come to terms with the fact that he's a cheater and a piece of shit, and that he was a servant sent down by the demon lord to destroy her. But when they reunite, Hachi can't bring herself to feel that way anymore. Even worse, she realizes a part of her still misses him. It's a wrong relationship. Even Hachi acknowledges that during their conversation, but she is forced to face the fact that she felt love for this man. That he is not this cartoonish villain like the demon lord she blames everything on, nor that he held a facade the entire time. But the simple fact that she did love him and he would never be able to give her what she desired, and she has to live with that. But even then, as they're leaving, there's this real genuine moment they have where they just look at each other, and it's a look so strong that I was even able to make my heart flutter and feel something, some sort of angst, I don't know. And more importantly, know that there was something here between them, something real and genuine. And that's fucking disgusting. Guys, we're talking about a man in his late 20s who took advantage of a minor. He belongs in the deepest depths of hell, and the fact that they actually had a wholesome moment together, even a moment that tugged at my heart. But this is what Nana specializes in, still making you feel those emotions knowing that you shouldn't be feeling them in that situation, almost like this weird battle between your brain and your heart. And it's genius. It's how Aizawa shows us just how easily people can be taken advantage of, and it begs the question of where must the line be drawn. She shows us horrible, despicable people, even worse than Asano, having genuinely sweet and nice parts of them, but it does not mean that they are good. It just means that they are human, and it's uncomfortable. And that same logic applies to Shoji. He's kind of a fucking loser, feels like he basically guilt tripped Hachi into a relationship, but they do have genuinely wholesome moments that, even knowing the context of, you can't help but feel the love between them. And I think that's especially important for a character like Hachi, a character that, according to Yuzawa, was specifically made for us to sympathize and relate to, because it gives you this weird feeling like you're looking outside the box into something that, in some weird way, you could have done yourself and probably been blind to, and you feel sorry for Hachi, and in turn, kind of sorry for yourself. One of the most important things about Nana is how it serves as a cautionary tale, and I'll get into the specifics of what that cautionary tale is later in the video, but us being unable to fight our emotions, knowing the uncomfortable context of the situation, makes those messages so much more vivid, and it's what gives the series such a realistic tone. And that logic of feeling something contradictory towards the characters applies to every part of the story, even down to how the characters are visually presented. Aizawa has a unique ability to design characters in a very, very specific way that brings them to life. She's spoken before about how she has a very intimate relationship with clothes, describing it as an obsession she's had going back to when she was a child. Later in her life, even studying to be a designer at fashion school, only to have to eventually drop out to start taking manga more seriously. She says that experience of having to abandon her dreams broke her heart until she realized she can still design clothes through manga, even making it the main plot of her earlier mangas like Neighborhood Story and Paradise Kiss, which revolves around kids that want to pursue careers in the fashion industry. That is a huge understatement, by the way. I still don't know what the fuck Paradise Kiss is even about, and I've read the manga twice. And you can feel the importance of it to her and how she portrays her characters through it. My favorite example of this in Nana has to be Ren Honjo, a character that gets introduced alongside Nana Osaki in the second chapter of the series. But before I even talk about anything to do with the fact that I cry every time I think about how much I love Ren, indulge me in a little exercise. Imagine you walk into a room and you see a guy wearing a leather jacket with no shirt, a chain, and spiky hair. You're probably gonna think either one of two things. Who the fuck does this piece of shit think he is? Or that he's a cutie patootie, basically comes across like an arrogant jackass. Versus if you walked into a room and saw him wearing a sweater with a teddy bear on it and he was bold. You'd probably think he's there to do something illegal. Or you're just a good person who doesn't judge people based on what they wear. Anyways, the point is Yuzawa's very precise and detailed designs, specific accessories, jewelries, clothing brands, etc. gives you a very strong sense of who they are, more than you would for a character with a less detailed design, and to an extent what you think is kind of true. Ren and Nana's designs are loosely based off, or more accurately to say a reference to, the very famous story of Sid and Nancy from the Sex Pistols, a couple that got drowned in fame and addiction, giving birth to a toxic love that ended with them dying. Finding out may or may not have led me down this weird British punk rabbit hole, but we're not going to get into that today. Do not let Ren trick you. This man was not a good person. My God! But if you're a Nana fan, you've probably heard this a million times, since Aizawa makes it very clear to us how much she's obsessed with the Sex Pistols. And on that note, everything British. I don't know why. I've been living in London for 22 years and still a shithole. It's actually what she says about Ren's design that really interests me. That he's not specifically based on Sid, but rather he's based on a trend at the time in Japan of people dressing up like him. In her own words, more like a Sid cosplay. And why the fuck is that difference interesting, you ask? When you look into that era and why teens were interested in a guy like Sid Vicious, this self-destructive maniac, was because of a nihilistic mentality that radiated in the youth of that era. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, Nana takes place in the late 1990s to early 2000s Tokyo, which is also known as being a part of the lost decade in Japan. After years of this economic boom post-World War II, Japan faced a severe crisis and stock prices collapsed, resulting in high unemployment rates, especially for young people. And what that gave birth to was a destructive generation full of people who no longer cared about the very society that abandoned them. And that's what Ren and Nana look like. Uncaring, nihilistic kind of people who wear the same clothes over and over, don't give a fuck about the rules, etc. And you can even see that in their backstories, both growing up as foster children having been abandoned by their parents. And the point of me talking about this is that it adds to that feeling that we get. They feel like these figures that represent the the sentiment of young people at the time, which a lot of us still feel today. I'm probably never going to be able to buy a house when I can barely afford to fix my fucking shower for 3 months. And you can see that when they're first introduced through the perspective of Misato, a Blast superfan. At this point, we've already seen through Hachi how cruel this world is and feels, but here we have these people dancing and breaking their way through it without a care in the world. We see them as these larger than life characters in the same way we see superheroes almost. And it's because we have such strong perceptions of them that when those perceptions are shattered, it hits even harder, reminding us that they're just humans. One of my favorite moments in the manga happens at the end of the second chapter, where Ren has made the decision to leave Blast and move to Tokyo after getting an offer he can't refuse to join Trap Nest as its guitarist. And with them already being so successful, this is a guarantee that his dream of being a pop star will come true. However, to do this, he has to leave his girlfriend Nana, who refuses to follow him and abandon her own dreams because of her unyielding pride of not wanting to rely on others, or more specifically, admit it. And this leads to this moment where we see them both on the train ready to say their goodbyes. At this point, we haven't seen much of Ren, meaning that to us he's still this kind of vague, out of this world figure, and for a lot of the early parts of Nana he remains that way. However, Aizawa proceeds to write 7 pages of complete and utter silence, no dialogue, and all we get in those 7 pages from Ren is a soft smile as he looks at Nana crying, him turning around to go and take a seat on the train, and then Nobu going to the window to see him sitting down crying all alone. In that very moment, Ren is no longer this uncaring, larger-than-life character, nor is he this representation of the gruesome world Japan was at the time for young people, but rather just somebody who is struggling with his emotions like the rest of us. And because we see that, we feel that, we know who he is from this moment onwards. Ren is this tragic, doomed person who, very much like Nana, has too much pride to give up anything, shown in his refusal to cry in front of her, and it's this moment that sets the basis for their toxic relationship. Being two people unable, unwilling to change, but still desperately latching onto each other out of a need of some sort of love. This giving another meaning to what they wear, like Ren's necklace, setting them on this path of destruction, not for society, but for themselves. But what makes them so tragic, you can see this genuineness they both have. Ren crying humanizes him because it shows that he does care. Their love is real, even if it's in an unhealthy circumstance. And it's these little contradictions, whether between one's clothing and personality, desires and actions, morality and beliefs, that is what Aizawa considers essential to conveying her vision for these people, saying, contradictions, that in itself is called human nature. I want to draw that humanness. For Hachi, she is a character who embodies the idea of begging to be loved, and Aizawa shows that through her fashion, Hachi's hyperfemininity being a stark contrast to Nana's punk rock aesthetic. Their look doesn't represent who they are, but how they want to be perceived, and it plays into their dynamic. Nana wants to be perceived as this hyper-independent person to Hachi, playing the role of a hero that she looks up to, and Hachi wants to be seen as this princess waiting for her prince. And maybe what I'm about to say is basic as fuck, but it's so smart because it mirrors real people once again. Aizawa not focusing on designing the characters and how they are, but focusing on their emotions and vulnerabilities, specifically who they pretend to be. The point is, it becomes clearer and clearer that their design encapsulates their flaws, which is what leads to most of the drama in the series. And it's that combination of portraying characters through their unchanging flaws and contradictory nature which takes them one step above other characters in other stories. It's not that they feel realistic, it's like they're real people moving on their own. And I'm going to say it once again because I really want to emphasize it, moving on their own. And when you dive deeper, you can see that it's the result of a very, very, very specific writing decision by Aizawa, which is what makes them feel like they're really moving. And I think the best way to convey this is by giving an example. After moving to Tokyo and reuniting with Nobu, Nana decides to revive Blast, determined to pursue her dream and rival Trap Nest, and in the process of that, searching for a new bassist to replace Ren, eventually coming across a guy by the name of Shinichi Okazaki. Now, Shin initially just comes across as this 18-year-old music fanatic, even mentioning that he's a huge fan of Ren. However, slowly through his interactions with the different characters in the series, we find out that he's far more complex than he initially seems. Through his conversations with Nobu, we understand that he's extremely perceptive, quickly getting him to spill the band's secrets, specifically Nana's relationship with Ren, which they went out of their way to hide. And even the way he talks to Hachi, calm, cool and collected, really gives you a sense that he's this matured, experienced person, especially when it comes to relationships. And him smoking and drinking constantly adds to that image. However, along with the cast, we're shocked to find out that he's living with Nobu because he has no home to go back to, and stuff like Nana mentioning that he looks like a child adds to that curiosity, until eventually we find out that he's actually a 15-year-old and working as a prostitute to survive. Just from those interactions and that context, we get a clear idea that Shin is this person that was forced to mature quickly, and even when he comes across as wise, it's sad because it's the result of him being exposed to the worst parts of people from a very early age. However, it's particularly through his relationship with Reira and Hachi, two people giving him different types of love, that really shape his character and his struggles. Reira is Trap Nest's lead singer and somebody who's been put in a box her entire life by the man she loves, Takumi, a love that she can't seem to escape. And as an outlet, she uses Shin, a fucking 15-year-old, okay, that to try and get over Takumi, knowing that he won't reciprocate her love. However, Reira actually being kind of a kind person, which once again is very contradictory from the context of what she's actually doing, means that this slowly changes from a client relationship for Shin to him slowly developing feelings for her. And it's genuinely heartbreaking seeing this person who's never known what real love looks like slowly getting his soul sucked out of him by the cruel adult world. Almost like you can see this dark future he has ahead of him. But I think what stops him from completely going down the path of people like Takumi, heck even Nana to a certain extent, is that he's surrounded by genuinely good-hearted people after he joins Blast. And to me, he's the proof of the heart that separates them from a cruel group of people like Trapness with no real support structure. We have Nobu, who acts as this big brother figure to him, even going as far as to provide a roof over his head, even though it's kind of funny because Shin is the one that's actually constantly advising him. And then there's Yasu, who serves as this kind of father figure for him, and Nana, who gives off this bratty older sister kind of vibe. And it really does feel like he's experiencing what having a family is actually like through them. I'd even go as far as to say that they eventually become his family. However, it's through his relationship with Hachi that we see deep down he is still a child looking for a maternal connection, which you won't find with people like Reira. And some of the most wholesome moments in the series is Hachi treating Shin like her child, finally allowing him to bring out his childlike nature, and puts him on this character arc of understanding his self-worth and identity, getting over his deep-rooted abandonment issues. What I wanted to establish by giving you that summary is that Shin is a very complex character that is dealing with a million more, even more complex and sensitive issues. But going back to that specific writing choice by Aizawa I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna now ask you a question. In all those panels I've showed you, or the way I've described him, did you notice anything specific? Gonna give you a second. Nope. I'm gonna tell you now. Not a single time did we get any inner thoughts or perspective from Shin himself. And on that note, 99% of the time, we don't get a single piece of monologue from any of the characters outside of the two main nanas. I am now going to explain to you why this is so fucking amazing. Aizawa has actively stated that she tries to not give any monologues or inner thoughts for her characters outside of the two protagonists. I actually heard about this after reading the manga in an interview she did acknowledging this, and I was like, nah, no way. I've read this manga 3 times. I'm pretty sure I know what's going on in those fat ass heads. Then I went back and checked, and it's true. Only the two nanas' inner thoughts are given to us outside of the bonus chapters that are not really part of the main story, which are still fucking amazing, and I'll talk a bit more about them later. But what this decision does is it naturally makes the process of writing these characters way harder, as you have to rely entirely on their unique traits, such as facial expressions, quirks, fashion choices, and other defining characteristics that give them life. However, as I've already established, Aizawa is amazing at this, meaning that the reward for an approach like that is instantly understanding what type of people they are based on how they interact with others in the story, like Shin. And this is something Aizawa has been doing for years. Take this short manga she wrote before called The Last Quarter. The first chapter starts out with a girl named Mizuki who runs away from home due to struggling with her father's remarriage after her mother's death and cheating ex-boyfriend. Eventually she runs into a British singer on the side road called Adam. I wonder why he's British. At first, Adam seems like this guy who came out of a fairy tale. He's a famous musician, has a mansion, instantly cares about Mizuki and invites her to live with him, kind of like a prince. However, the next day as Mizuki sees Adam in the morning, she notices 3 holes in his arm which look fresh. Instantly she realizes that it's probably a result of him taking drugs. Then he starts to break down, shouting at Mizuki, calling her by the name of his ex-girlfriend who passed away. And instantly in that one moment, one page, Yazawa quickly shows Adam as this broken man without the need to explain everything. We immediately understand his sadness and struggles, making him this tragic human character. And she does that in 2 pages. 2 pages, like, I don't know, maybe I'm making this a bigger deal than it is, but in 2 pages, we instantly get such a strong image of who this person is and everything about him without the use of any exposition or monologues. Like, most stories can take chapters and chapters and chapters to give us an idea of what a character is, and she does it just like that. Ultimately, what this does is it gives us a chance to interpret characters differently. Going back to Ren, for example, later on, we learn that he's a huge Shonen Jump fan, which highlights this youthful and almost childlike nature he has, and that detail combined with the subtle kindness he shows adds a certain softness to his character, which makes him way more relatable. Or Nana's obsession with Vivian Westwood and the Sex Pistols makes her feel kinda quirky. Or how the only person a power-hungry piece of shit like Takumi respects is Yasu, giving him aura. I couldn't think of anything else to describe Yasu. And I think on a deeper level, stuff like this feels real because that's how we perceive humans. We forget that in stories we see so much of the characters' thoughts and feelings explained by them, and that of course has advantages like allowing us to get more intimate and attached to them, but it's not applicable to real people. Getting their inner thoughts takes away from a character having multiple angles. Instead, however, removing that aspect helps us see the characters through their relationships. They're shown from different perspectives with their own motivations and flaws, and we see them differently based on their interactions, with their personalities least changing depending on who they're with. For example, some people love Hachi in the story, whilst others think she's annoying as fuck, which is kinda meta if you think about it. And that decision is intertwined with the storytelling. Most authors and us, the audience, want narratives where everything feels planned, like everything is part of a grander, more cohesive design, and this structure gives us a sense of comfort, like the story is guided by a deliberate hand, with each moment foreshadowing a larger purpose. However, Aizawa challenges that approach by doing the complete opposite. She says that she doesn't plan the story specifically, but lets it unravel on its own, a lot of the time describing how she gets surprised herself by what direction the story takes. And you can kind of feel that when reading it, and it kind of feels like she embraces that unpredictability of life, where not everything is predetermined or seamlessly tied together, allowing the story to reflect the raw and more spontaneous nature of the human experience. And her justification for this is that when she's writing, she feels like nothing more than the medium which through we see the characters move on their own, and therefore there is no need to show their thoughts, as you can see who they are and how they think, simply based on how they choose to act. Do you know how talented of a writer you have to be to do this? The only other time I've heard a writer speak like this is in a way describing his writing process behind Vagabond, which also happens to be my other favorite manga, saying that he just feels like he's putting a camera in front of the characters and that all he's doing when writing is figuring out what angle to shoot from. The story will come by itself. Also, a bit of a side note, apparently she's a huge Takiko Inoue fan, so just some goat on goat action there. What I'm trying to get at here is that when you reach a certain level of skill as an artist, or maybe it'll be more accurate to say that when you develop a deep understanding of the world and characters you've created, you enter a kind of flow state, and in this state, the characters seem to take on a life of their own, speaking and acting in ways that feel natural and effortless, as if you're no longer consciously guiding them. And those are Aizawa's words and not mine. She goes out of her way to give herself over to the character's feelings, even if she thinks, no, if I go that way, it will be problematic for the story. If that's how the characters feel, I'll just accept it and give up. I don't think my role is to make the characters act the way I want them to, but to direct and edit their selfish actions so that they seem more interesting to read. And all of that is why I say it feels like the characters move on their own, like real people. Now, okay, this so far is enough to see why so many people come out of the anime feeling the way they do about Nana, a masterpiece. But I'm gonna be that guy and say, however good you think the Nana anime is, times that by 5 and you get the manga, and you might think that's an over-exaggeration, but trust me, it's true. There are two types of mangaka out there. Ones that simply use manga as a way of telling their story, regardless of how good the art is. Take Death Note, for example. The art is amazing, but he doesn't do anything interesting with the paneling or anything else unique to the medium of manga, meaning that you could just as easily tell that story somewhere else, like a good anime adaptation or even a TV show, because you wouldn't lose anything in the adaptation. And the second type are mangaka that use the medium to the max, meaning that if it was to get an anime adaptation, for example, it would not be possible to convey all of those unique elements from the manga in it without losing something. A recent example of this would be Witch Hat Altier that has pages like this. It is physically impossible to animate this exactly like the manga without it looking absolutely stupid. And as you can probably guess, Aizawa is the latter, but not just the fucking latter, but by far one of the best examples of somebody using this medium to the fullest. That being said, before I even get into that, I think it's only fair to say that Nana's anime does have a lot of pros. A huge part of Nana revolves around music, and Aizawa went out of her way to pick all the songs performed by the cast, as well as specifically choosing Shuya Anna to sing for Nana Osaki and Olivia Lufkin to sing for Reira, and they sound amazing. Not to mention that the OSTs are just as good. It is also one of the very few cases where I think the English dub is really good, and on top of that, they do a good job of trying to match Aizawa's style and adapt it accurately. That being said, there's still a lot it's missing from the manga. Everything that's good about Nana, from the emotions, that stomach turning feeling we get, the characters' facial expressions, the designs, are all amplified to an extreme in the manga, making it a much more intimate experience. And an example of this is how Aizawa chooses to draw her backgrounds. Authors like Aizawa and Inio Asano, the author of Oyasumi Punpun, choose to use real photos that they later digitally enhance to give the story a more grounded feel. It's an active choice and not just to be lazy like some people might think, since most backgrounds are drawn by assistants anyways. It's visceral and raw, and I think the best way to convey what this adds to the experience is by giving an example. After Hachi and Nana move in together, they go to the store to buy some stuff for their apartment, and like always, they're having their funny back and forth, Hachi being the usual bubbly and unintentionally funny person that she is, and Nana just being Nana. However, while shopping, Hachi sees a CD store and wants to go inside, and as they enter the store, Nana sees a huge Trapness poster stuck on the wall with Ren's face on it, and instantly in that moment, Nana is brought back down from the high Hachi is giving her and reminded of the painful memories she has of Ren and the longing she feels for him. At this moment, not knowing whether or not she'll ever get to see him again, before Hachi does what she usually does and acts like a goofball, snapping her out of it. Now, that moment is good. Great even in the anime, but what makes this moment even better in the manga is two things. One, like I said earlier, being the background. We see here when they enter the store that the background is hand-drawn with very minimal shades surrounding the characters. However, when she's all alone, Yazawa transitions into a photographic background, instantly changing the tone from being cute into a much more raw and visceral feeling, and most importantly, it forces you to feel what Nana is feeling. The background directly contrasts that simplistic cartoonish depiction of how Ayazawa draws them, and it highlights the emotional distance between their inner turmoil and the world around them, and amplifies those feelings of isolation that these girls experience, emphasizing how out of place they feel. And it's important because you're seeing a reflection of a human, and more specifically yourself, through these characters. But that being said, Ayazawa uses it a bit differently than Inyo Asano does. She doesn't go for that hyper-realistic approach, but instead a more hazy kind of photo, and I think what that does is enhance that melancholic feeling I mentioned earlier, and makes the manga feel more vintage, which plays into that overall memories feeling Nana has. But that isn't the only thing behind the characters that makes moments like this so impactful. Look at what's being drawn around her. The heavy usage of screen tones and lights, detailed eyes, a delicate fragile atmosphere, thin lines and bubbles. Shoujo is known for being able to convey those unexplainable emotions we feel, and it's able to do that with these kind of techniques. And you can see that in how different it is to shonen storytelling. They have much more rigid paneling and minimal use of lights and tones with a clear focus on action. And this is something that has been cultivated since the inception of manga through many artists, and is the only place where you'll get an intimate experience like this, not just in manga, but maybe even media as a whole. Now, I'm gonna hold myself back from getting into how the shoujo demographic does not get enough credit for the influence it's had and the amazing fucking stories it still produces today. Check out my other video for that. But the point I want to take away is that a lot of people still think shoujo is just romance, and techniques like the ones I've mentioned is only used for that purpose, which is simply not the case. And Ayazawa is living proof that is used for much more complex and even bleak moments. Nana watching Ren fly above her as she starts to cry, Hachi's heartbreak, and the intimate moments we get between them. Those moments are great in the anime, but are defined by the intricate paneling and shades Yazawa uses to express it. Even the comedic moments in the series are funnier in my opinion because of what she puts around the characters. However, it's those darker moments in the series where techniques like this really start to come into play. One occasion I think about a lot is Hachi reflecting on a decision she's making, which ended up being one of the moments that just absolutely broke me in the series, and a big part of that is how it was expressed through the art. Early on in the manga, Hachi's about to make a decision she's not comfortable with. Being brought back to a hotel by Takumi, a pop star piece of shit, scumbag, death-worshipping rat boss. She completely understands what this situation is, Takumi taking advantage of the fact that she's a fan, and knows that this situation isn't the one for her, being how she seeks a real idealistic kind of love. However, as she's reflecting on her actions and thinking of escaping, she quickly ends up getting trapped into this decision as a result of her inferiority complex, and you really feel that sinking feeling in your chest as Hachi contemplates it. This panel being right next to the shining Takumi and transitioning from a detailed picture of herself into a blank white one being consumed by the darkness behind her, and once again transitioning into that gritty photographic background, making this feel so much worse. But then everything goes back to normal in the next page as she convinces herself that it's okay for her to do this. However, as she picks up the phone before she goes to Takumi, she talks to Nana, and at that moment she completely breaks down, having to confront her negative emotions honestly for, in my opinion, the first time in the series. And it's honestly so just... I think it'll be better if I just read it out. I don't want Nana to think I'm a total slut. She'd be bummed. But Nana, I too want true love, just like you do. I'd love to have something like you and Ren have. Hey Nana, actually, I'm not okay at all. I don't want to have a one-night stand with Takumi. But what should I do? Nana, I'm scared. But I think it's too late to turn back. And I can't tell him that I want him to love me. What if I get hurt all over again? Now, I'm not a good narrator or reader or whatever the fuck you want to call that, but just reading that shit, man, it hurt. This moment in the manga is a roller coaster of back and forth emotions between Hachiko's cope and confronting her biggest flaw, that lack of self-love, and you can feel that all throughout it, whether it be that moment of emptiness, the picture of Takumi poisoning her with that rough black shading engulfing the light, or that cryptic page of Nana in her mind, those detailed eyes in the white staring at her, judging her. It's a lot, but it's something you have to experience purely because of how intricately we are diving into and experiencing what these characters are feeling. And honestly, I feel like experiencing moments like this, I don't know, it just makes you a kinder person. I'm sorry if this sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but I can't even explain it. It's just how it makes me feel. Maybe because you're seeing what it's like to go through emotional pain. I don't know, but it hurts. And on the opposite end, when you add in her ability to draw these kind of facial expressions, you get some of the most heart-tugging feelings out there. My personal favorite expression is this soft look that she draws. Just look at it. I'm not even going to say anything about the context of it or anything like that. I just want you to look at it and think about all the emotions the characters are feeling. Okay, done. Now I'm going to say mine completely off script. A faint sadness, longing, contentness, melancholy, nostalgia, some sort of peace. God, I could go on and on and on, all in one picture. Like, if that isn't emotional depth, I don't know what the fuck is. The Death of Marat by a guy called David in 1793. Fuck that. Give me some art of Hachi crying and that's enough to make me jump off a fucking roof. What I'm trying to say is that you can't get this in the anime. Like, it's good, but not Aizawa good, you know? This is her 8th shoujo manga at this point, not including short stories, and has completely mastered the art of being able to convey a character's emotion through what's subtly happening around them. And you can see that evolution in how she discusses her relationship with those series. I'm No Angel, a typical coming-of-age high school romance, was the work that made her comfortable with writing unified stories. Neighborhood Story, revolving around students enrolled in art school pursuing careers in the fashion industry, was the work that made her realize that she loved to draw a huge cast of characters with so many different styles. Paradise Kiss, a story about a girl finding her own dreams as a model instead of following the path set for her by others, kind of a sequel to Neighborhood Story, was finally the work where she could draw whatever she wanted to, and it very much shows. And finally, in her own words, Nana is the work of my life. There I put into play all the cards in my hand, and you can feel that experience she has drawing shoujo in every aspect whilst you're reading it. The nuanced use of black and white to flow through the characters, the screen crackling with feelings, the characters drowning in past experiences, levitating, evaporating, breaking and forming. It is fucking unreal. She has taken something so great to a whole nother level, and I can't recommend the manga enough, even if I think the anime is great. But all that being said, I think the most realistic thing about the series, or maybe it would be more accurate to say what makes the series stand out in its style of storytelling, is how that combination of things I've talked about so far allows Aizawa to convey that feeling that we are flying through somebody's memories. The most personal aspect of Nana is its two main characters discussing their old experiences vaguely, not being specific but enough to convey that things are no longer the same, seen with the past tense monologues at the end of each chapter. These are people far into the future having already reflected on what we're currently seeing, and it makes events so much more impactful. These are the moments that have defined the person giving that monologue, almost like you can hear their pain/regret, and it's that regret that makes it clear that things aren't going to stay this way forever. Hachi and Nana will go their separate ways, and that's the heart of the melancholic tone this series has. The emphasis on realism adds to the authenticity of that experience. But I think what's most important about all of this is that it puts you in a situation as the reader where you have to confront your own emotions, and that's a good thing. That is what makes this story important. That is why reading it will make you a better fucking person, a smarter person, and like I said earlier, a kinder person, and a chance to reflect and change on how you treat others, and more importantly on how you treat yourself. And the story of two girls who make you think of this is something that I feel like everyone has to experience at least once. Now, everything I've said so far was for the purpose of expressing what makes Nana so fucking amazing and why it's an experience you need. From this moment onwards, I will be focusing on making sense of this series, this 15-year hiatus situation, and how not to be fucking depressed. So if you are one of those people that was thinking about reading/watching it, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you come back with tears and depression once you've consumed that Nana goodness so I can carry you through that pain. Earlier I briefly mentioned how a huge part of Nana is that it is a cautionary tale, but what exactly does that even mean, especially when there can be a million different ones? Don't be a piece of shit. Leave children alone. Talk, for fuck's sake, talk to your friends when you're going through shit. And I think where this idea becomes the most important is Hachi's relationship with Takumi Ichinose. But quickly, before I even say anything about him, I want to take one moment to express my hatred for this man, or else I'm going to be really annoying the entire time and maybe even piss you off, and I don't want to do that. So I'm gonna let it all out in my native language so I don't get cooked by YouTube. اي يا كلب ابن 16 كلب سرطان بقلبك خنزير تف عليك تف rat bastard piece of shit. Okay, got out my system. Takumi is the basis of Trapnest and basically the brains behind the band, having started this way back when he was a kid alongside Reira, building them up into the powerhouse that they are. He's also very charming, successful, good looking, and many chapters before we even meet him, he's built up to be Hachi's little celebrity crush. We actually only meet him for the first time when Nana asked Ren to bring him over as a little gift from Nana to Hachi later in the series, and he uses a culmination of this to take advantage of Hachi, consistently pressuring her into a relationship with him and going after all of her vulnerabilities when they first meet, carrying on after that uncomfortable encounter I described earlier. And just in case it isn't obvious, Takumi does not love her, and a part of Hachi is acutely aware of this, but she can't handle that. Hachi bases her self-worth on whether other people love her, and at this point she has very little experience of what a healthy relationship looks like. She justifies the experiences in her head. It has to be love, and if she can't be loved, at the very least she would be desired, eventually developing an emotional dependency on him after breaking up with Shoji. The reasonable part of Hachi knows this is wrong, and it's why she feels this instinct to keep it from Nana, horrified she would judge her. But Hachi, like most of the characters in Nana, largely largely runs off emotions and vulnerabilities alone. And I think it's why when Hachi begins to realize the people around her genuinely care about her for her and not as a burden or an extension to Nana, she comes to her senses and leaves Takumi, eventually finding refuge in Nobu. And although, like everyone in this fucking story, he's not perfect, Nobu is a genuinely kind, caring, and honest person, constantly going out of his way to help others, like with Nana Osaki and later Shin. And because of that, Hachi's relationship with Nobu feels like this breath of fresh air and something me and probably everyone else reading has been waiting for the entire manga. Hachi is finally dating someone who genuinely cares about her. She's realizing her place with the band as a family, and her and Nana's relationship only grow closer. It's sweet, it's nice, it's beautiful, and most importantly, she's finally happy. And this section of the story genuinely was so fun to read, and it made me so happy, and I loved life, and I was smiling. And then Aizawa gives us one of the biggest plot twists in the series. Hachi is pregnant, and with that, a big chance that child belongs to Takumi. It's one of the most stomach-turning experiences in the manga, and you can see that in how she uses those techniques I mentioned earlier, the realistic backgrounds engulfing her as the darkness spreads. I can feel the loneliness she feels, and can't imagine how tough this must be to find out in a public restroom of all places. It's hard to watch. It's brutal. However, Hachi wanting to be needed and viewing this child as her second chance in life, playing into this worthless image she has of herself and her guilt, as well as that maternal instinct and empathy she has we see with people like Shin, chooses to keep that child and is therefore put in a predicament where she has to choose either Nobu or Takumi to raise the child. And Hachi chooses Takumi. I've seen way too many people hate Hachi for this decision, but a little look into her character will show the reader exactly why she made this choice. On a completely logical level, you cannot blame Hachi for choosing Takumi. He promises Hachi the exact dream life she'd been wanting, he'd financially take care of both of them for the rest of their lives, and they'd get married. He then manipulates her, bringing down her self-esteem and her agency as a human being, which ultimately led to her decision. Not to mention the fact that Takumi completely took advantage of her in the most vulnerable state of her life. However, that's not the full picture. The other reason she chooses Takumi is because she loves Nobu and chooses to make an altruistic decision. Hachi believes that she is the lowest of the low, that a monster like her might as well be with a monster like Takumi. She feels like she's not worthy of a genuinely good person like Nobu, and she doesn't have the right to ruin his life. And so she prioritizes Nobu's dream to be a pop star after running away from his loaded family, being unwilling to take that away from him, knowing that Nobu would drop everything and go back to his family to help her. But using what Aizawa constantly preaches in her writing, Nobu is extremely flawed because at the end of the day, he's also this pathetic creature known as a human. Hachi believes Nobu puts her on a pedestal, that he believes that she's some innocent, cheery girl that he should take care of, and as we later see when Nana calls him out for, this stems from this weird kind of savior complex he has. That being said, Nana honey, I'ma need you to be a little bit more self-aware, and therefore she thinks she is wholly undeserving of that love, and I've reached my limit. Hachi, we love you. Stop thinking this way, please. And it's here where we see in this very complex triangle what Yazawa cautions us against. Hachi's lack of communication with those around her, even if it stems from that self-hatred that I keep mentioning, does nothing but isolate her from the people around her, and with that, facing issues like this alone, it's dangerous and you shouldn't do it. Nobu and the issues of not acknowledging people's flaws and putting them on a pedestal that they have to live up to, which can end up pushing them away. The female experience and the dangers of men like Takumi who use their power to prey on you. But most importantly, that you should prioritize your own happiness. Because even if Hachi choosing Nobu comes across as a selfless thing, the lack of communication between them only strains their relationship and damages them, and even affects her relationship with Nana. And all of this is such a brutally eye-opening experience for people like me who have never experienced something like that. And on the other hand, a way of confronting and understanding that experience for those who have been through something like Hachi. But honestly, I think what I found to be the most impactful and genuinely heartbreaking in this situation is seeing this all unfold through the lens of the other protagonist, Nana Osaki. Throughout this entire situation, she can't do anything but watch as she realizes that Takumi and Nobu are giving Hachi the one thing she can never give her: male validation. Why can't Hachi and Nana live together? Why can't they move into the house that Nana mentioned buying for her, raise that child, and build a life together? Wasn't that their dream? Well, the answer to why any of this can't happen is because Nana is too prideful to reach out, which means that she can't do anything but watch as what is probably the strongest bond she's ever made break right in front of her. Which is ironic because that's what real heroes do, reach out to others who need saving. But I think what I find most disturbing about this is how similar she is to Takumi, dare I say opposite sides of the same coin. Now, before you start cooking me for saying they are similar, I am going somewhere with this, and I am not in any way insinuating that Nana is going to hell the way a piece of shit like Takumi is. Okay, just Give me a chance because it's actually really interesting. Takumi and Nana are both the manifestations of the brutal upbringing they had, and this possessiveness they feel towards others is simply the result of that. The pain of being abandoned by society, the want to escape, the need to prove themselves to others and gain some sort of validation from the very society they despise, which is ironic, and most of all this deep self-hatred they both share, but not in the way somebody like Hachi does, but something more along the lines of this acceptance that if the world is cruel and shitty, I'll be even worse. And the one thing that separates them, Takumi being this unforgivable being that he is, and Nana being a somewhat decent person, is real love. It might sound corny, but it's true. Through the Takumi bonus chapters at the end of volume 18, we get an in-depth look into his thought process and upbringing way later in the series, and we see here how he became the horrible man that he is. Takumi grew up in an abusive household where he got neglected by his alcoholic father and left all alone by his mother, who had a very severe illness. This means that she was constantly in the hospital, putting the pressure on both of them, him and his sister, to cover their mother's hospital bill and survive on their own. This naturally gave birth to a very deep hatred within Takumi and a need to escape his circumstances, or more specifically put himself above it, and he found a way to do that through Reira, this innocent and beautiful half-American girl with an even more beautiful voice who may or may not have grown up to be a groomer. Regardless, the point is, Takumi chooses to objectify the only genuine connection he's ever had. One, because he's not able to comprehend / understand what the relationship even is. Once again, like a lot of the characters in the series, because he's never experienced a healthy connection beforehand. And two, he views himself as someone who has been dirtied by the cruel world that he lives in and doesn't want to pass that on to Reira, only vaguely understanding that she's a pillar for him, the last piece of good he has left. And that mentality carries on to how he treats other people. He has no empathy whatsoever, constantly commenting about how he doesn't understand others, specifically women, only viewing them as tools to deal with his stress and emptiness. And that is something that only gets worse and worse and worse as he grows up, cultivating him into this cold and calculating individual who interacts with people like they're pieces on a chessboard, all for the sole purpose of reaching his dream and most of all, maintaining it. And like we see through the other bonus chapters, nobody steps over his authority, even from an early age, and if they do, well, this happens. By the way, the context of that was the guy just wanted to change the song order, which goes to show how controlling Takumi is and how little he trusts others. And honestly, he does keep getting away with it, but there are long-term consequences to his actions, and that consequence comes in the form of Reira. Reira is a genuinely innocent person, or at least she was. She's kind, thinks about others, and you can see that in this kind of wholesome relationship she has with Ren, where she tries to comfort him through his struggles. But she is, like, for the 5th time in this video, I'm sorry, a groomer, and takes advantage of a 15-year-old Shin who is still trying to figure out what he is. And this is the result of her being kept in a box by Takumi with no knowledge about other people or what a healthy relationship looks like, having spent the last 20 years of her life trying to gain his validation from the sidelines, ultimately turning her into the same monster that he is. Funnily enough, Takumi basically being the first person in the series to acknowledge how insane their relationship is. But on the flip side, like having to acknowledge the good parts of Reira to understand her, what this chapter does is help you come to terms with the fact that Takumi isn't a devil, he's a human. And that becomes clear especially when seeing him as a kid, breaking the windows desperately, wanting to escape his circumstances. You feel sorry for him, or specifically you feel sorry for that child. Once again, I don't want to, but I do. Having to live for 10 years of your youth, knowing your mother could die at any moment, and having an alcoholic dad takes your soul away. It doesn't justify it, but I would be lying if I said I don't understand how he became like this. And you can kind of see that in his face when his mother finally passes away. This panel of Takumi at his mother's funeral stuck with me for a while because it felt so soulless, like I was looking directly at a man that had given up on people. And that same logic carries into his relationship with Hachi. Once they settle down together and get married, as much as it breaks my heart, we see those genuinely wholesome moments start to come out. Takumi, who's never experienced what it's genuinely like to have a home, start to actually experience it through the superpower Hachi has of being a genuinely fucking good person in this story that he has to confront and see day after day. And even though a lot of his bad parts remain, he's still fucking cheating on her. Also, a bit of a side note, the 6th sense that Hachi has, always knowing when somebody's fucking about, is like objectively hilarious. And eventually he actually starts to grow and show more empathy towards others and even respecting Hachi's authority over him. One moment that really stuck with me happens a bit later in the manga, and it revolves around Reira. She's no longer able to keep her feelings in check and therefore puts Takumi in a situation where he can no longer keep objectifying her and keep this illusion that she's some sort of angel to him. She's far too broken at this point, so to fix this, he sleeps with her. He's a fucking piece of shit. Like, I don't know what else to say. Because Nana is the fucked up series that it is. When he leaves to go home to work the next day and Hachi seeing how stressed he is, she apologizes. But in response, he just looks at Hachi and there's this real genuine moment where he just tells her that she's the only one he really loves in this world. And I think he's being honest. It's a love that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but it's real. And just like Asano, it's disgusting and undeserving and wrong for me to be feeling this way about such a horrible, disgusting person, but it's how you feel and it's honest, it's human. But that being said, at this point it's far too late. The damage Takumi has done to people like Hachi, Nobu, and Reira and Ren will catch up to him. He's spent his entire life not knowing what that love Hachi is giving him is, and he is the monster in this story because of that, even if there is an understanding of how he ended up this way. The emotional and physical abuse he's given Hachi, even doing the thing that's even worse than murder, violating her, some things are simply unforgivable, and no amount of repenting can ever make up for it. And it's the fact that I understand him so well, it's the fact that I understand people like him could really exist. Takumi Ichinose is one of the most terrifying characters I've ever come across in fiction, and he makes my stomach fucking turn. And this is the key difference between Nana and Takumi. It's having people around you who love you, and more than that, are willing to be honest and vulnerable with you. And it ties into one of the core messages that it cautions you against: a lack of communication from all sides. Nana arguably had an even worse childhood than Takumi, but she has that support system around her, real friends and not minions, and you can see that in her friendship with Nobu, which in my opinion is probably the most underrated dynamic in the series. In the Nobu bonus chapter we get at the end of volume 15, we get a look into Nobu's upbringing, and with that, how he came across Nana. Like Takumi, as a child, Nana was extremely antisocial, completely airing anybody's approach to get to know her, and that included Nobu for a while, until she finally cracked due to their shared love for music and started borrowing his CDs. Also, another side note, I find it really funny that Nobu was the one that introduced her to Vivienne Westwood and the Sex Pistols. I don't know why, it's not relevant, but I just find it really funny. However, later on we found out that there's been a rumor circulating around the school that Nana is working as a prostitute. It's obviously not true, however she refuses to deny it, and Nobu calls her out on that. She responds by saying that she was gonna drop out anyway to work, and Nobu's first thought, being somebody that grew up from a privileged family, is there something you want to buy? And instantly in this moment, it's like this imaginary line gets drawn between them. Nana replying, of course, that's what a rich boy like you would think, before she disappears for a few months, not even showing up for school. This hurt Nobu on a genuinely deep level because he empathizes with her, and more than that, misses her company as a friend. And a few weeks pass before Nobu finally calls her, only to find out that her grandmother had passed away, the only thing that she had left, and Nana simply breaks down. He goes to her empty apartment and mourns alongside her, and he makes a vow to her grandmother to stay by her side. And in my opinion, this is so important to a story like this, because it's that one moment of vulnerability where she cried on the phone to Nobu that in my opinion is why Nana deep in her core is a truly kind person, and Takumi is the representation of everything bad in this verse. They both have toxic masculine traits, but it's whether or not people are able to break through that define them. People like Yasu, Ren, and later Hachi are there to pick her up and guide her on the right path. One of Nana's flaws is her lack of communication, but it isn't her lack of vulnerability, which she could definitely improve on, but at the very least she has people in this world that she can be open and comfortable with, and with that, people that can criticize her. My favorite example of this is when Ren calls her out on her shit later in the series, forcing Nana to acknowledge her selfish and controlling tendencies. She wants Ren to abandon Trapness and stay with her. She wants Yasu to be single and stay by her side forever, even though she's very aware of his feelings. She wants to use Nobu like a chess piece, and she wants Hachi to abort her child and leave Takumi. But once again, that's not fair on them. Just like her, they all have their own dreams and values, and going back to Ren and that toxic relationship they have, because of their unwillingness to make any sacrifices, they can't fulfill each other's desires, and they both acknowledge that. But what's even more impactful to me than that is the small moment right after their argument where Ren gets up to leave for his tour and looks at Nana crying to say, "Nana, I'm leaving now. Don't forget to buy me Jump every week." And Nana looks at him, instantly stopping her crying to say, "Sure, no problem," before Ren gives this beautiful small smile and goes. And that moment, just like the Nobu one, means so much to me. In an opposite way to Takumi and Hachi's dynamic, there can be so many things wrong between two people, but still have something overwhelmingly beautiful, something that keeps you rooting for them. And you can see that with Ren and Nana, because— now pause. I can't hold it in any longer. I don't give a fuck anymore. I don't care. I am now going to talk about my favorite character, Nana. Naoki! I love Naoki, he's unproblematic, he's the only guy that's always happy, he's the only guy that never has any issues, he's the only guy that just, I can enjoy him in peace. But everything I just said is not true. He's actually the opposite. He's quite a disturbing figure in the series and kind of creeps me out. And because I'm a weirdo, that makes me really like his character. And I want to tell you why a character that the majority of this fan base think is unproblematic and sweet maybe, is actually horrifying and makes me re-see this entire fucking series. Just like he looks, Naoki first comes across as this careless, playful hottie who is ignorant to the world around him, just wanting to have fun. But every now and then you get this weird moment where it's like he reveals his real views on things before it gets brushed aside and he goes back to just being Naoki. and it largely remains that way until Aizawa released a bonus chapter from his perspective, revealing that he's much more aware than he actually lets on, and it really fucks with me. The chapter essentially gives us the backstory to Trapnest band members through Naoki's perspective. We see Takumi as his authority figure that nobody steps over, as well as seeing how Reira slowly gets more distant. We see Ren and Yasu's lives as foster children, and ultimately how all of these people come from broken homes. And then there's just Naoki, somebody who comes from a normal family and wants to be popular with the girls. He's a bit out there, so he fits right into Takumi's vision for the band. Now that's all cool, but it's what happens midway through that's just bizarre. We get introduced to a girl named Haruko, and she is the person Naoki is dating in high school, and it's actually really cute. According to him, they only hold hands and talk, but he loves it. And as the story goes on, we see Yasu's skinhead transition, Trapnest climbing up the ranks in high school, etc. But every now and then, the story cuts to Naoki having his doubts about the band, but Haruko is there to constantly reassure him and keep him going. We see Takumi's mother's death, Reira and Yasu's relationship develop, Ren's early days as a musician, until they finally decide to go to Tokyo, with Haruko even agreeing to go with him there. And then they got big, and that's it. The end. Until it's revealed that Haruko never actually existed. Instead, it was an idea he'd made up and been using as a coping mechanism to deal with all the disgusting actions Takumi was making him do to make money for the band, even insinuating that he might have had to work as a prostitute for him as a minor to make money. And that's insane! And the picture that kind of paints is that all Naoki is this soldier that wants to see where Takumi's dream takes him, constantly ignoring the horrific things he does, and therefore he is not unproblematic in the slightest. And then apparently that may not be true either, because in the very next page, he smashes through the fourth wall, asking us which story do you think is true, him being a prostitute or Haruko. And you know what, based on everything I've spoken about so far, cruel men like Takumi, the cruel world of Japan at the time, the fucking horrible experiences our characters go through again and again, I'm inclined to believe the latter, that Naoki was also taken advantage of. And on a bigger scale, I kind of feel like it's easier to fall into this depressive state because of Nana, that it makes you assume the worst in people because sometimes it's like that's all we can see. I've always said this to people before they transition from the anime to the manga to finish the story, that after the anime, the manga just puts the characters through worse and worse and worse situations until the worst imaginable thing happens and the manga just ends. And if you want to know what that worst imaginable thing is, Ren, the heart of the story, passes away. Ren never had a good support system around him after he left Blast, and it finally comes back to haunt him, constantly suffering alone without anybody to save him. And no longer being able to take this, he falls into a drug addiction, the only way he could keep going through Takumi's empire, and those drugs were even given to him by the band's producer. But Ren, being the man that he is, fights it and wants to get better, especially for Nana's sake. However, one day as he's driving home, he's followed by paparazzi, the same ones that had been harassing him throughout the series, and speeds up in an attempt to get away. However, as he passed his old home, for a single moment he sees Nana sitting on the roof all alone, and that instinct to save her kicks in, turning the car as fast as he can. However, he loses control and hits his home. In the end, it wasn't even Nana, but just a black cat sitting all alone that he mistook her for. He dies instantly from the crash. And in the story, when this happens, it just feels like everything stopped. No more music, arguments, drama, it just stops because everything was connected to Ren. One of the most haunting moments in the manga is Takumi and Nobu's reaction to Ren's dead body, describing that he still has his hands intact, but that the rest of his body was completely ruined. Takumi even describing that it was like his padlock chain merged with his head, but that it was like he did everything he could to protect his hands. Yasu going on to say, we'll never know if it was because of the drugs or not because he's dead. Nobody can judge him anymore. And it's here where I look back on him and realize that he isn't like the rest of those broken people in this story. Ren kind of feels like this outlier in this whole situation because he has that same harsh upbringing as Takumi and Nana, and yet he is a genuinely kind and loving person. Don't get it twisted, he still has those controlling tendencies, but it's different. He acknowledges it, and you can see that in this moment in the snow with Reira where he admits that he wants to kill Nana so she can stay with him forever. Trust me, he's a good guy, just a little bit of a weirdo. But right after he breaks down because he wants to be punished for thinking that, knowing that he has no right to feel that way. And that perfectly represents that difference and who he is. He never once shied away from his upbringing or flaws. He grew up showing off about them and using that to his advantage, and that's something we find out about him from the very first time we meet him. He tries to improve even in the worst of situations and the darkest of pits he finds himself in, and his massive amount of kindness that he gives to others stems from that. And it's why he's the centerpiece of this story, connecting all the characters together, and I like to think that reaches Nana to some extent, and that's why she's never able to detach herself completely from him. And it's for that reason that, even worse than everything I've said so far, Nana's reaction to Ren's death is by far the most painful thing about this situation. She doesn't really cry or sob much, she just becomes distant. She just stares and sits in her room all day, and then the manga ends and goes on hiatus for 15 years. And yeah, do you get what I'm saying now? Like, this is the last time we see our beloved Nana and Hachi. Like, bro, I've never seen a manga that went on hiatus ending on such a heartbreaking note, and it gets to me. I feel like it gets to all of us. But I'm actually going to argue against myself here because I'm a weirdo. That's actually not the last time we see them. Chronologically, that is. In the last few flashes to the future, we find out from Hachi and the gang that she's disappeared. They don't know where she is, and as a matter of fact, don't know whether she's even alive, with rumors even circulating that she's died at sea. At this point, a decade has probably passed. Hachi has 2 kids, which I may or may not have strong theories about, and is ready to divorce Takumi, but refuses to give up and holds on to that faith that she's still alive, and finally she's rewarded for that prayer. She gets a letter revealing that Nana is alive and living alone in England, and then we finally, for the first time in the series, switch to future Nana's perspective, and it's one line we get from her staring into the sea that really rattled me to my core. Hey Hachi, I came here looking for a place to die, so why am I still here? I've read the series a few times now, but when I first did, I was like, damn, is that it? And was depressed. The point is, it left me with a question. Is Nana just a story about the cruelty of humans? A story about how love isn't this idealistic thing Hachi wants it to be, and that we need to keep our fucking emotions in check, and that all it is just a cautionary tale? And I'm gonna be completely honest, I refuse to accept that because it went against everything I felt in my time reading it. I cried, I laughed, I giggled, I kicked my feet like a little girl, and so I had to know what it was I was meant to take away from a story like this. Aizawa's main and possibly final message to the world, with Nana looking less and less likely to return. And honestly, after doing some research into Aizawa, it broke my heart. When she was seen after the hiatus was first announced, she was described to be so ill that she could barely walk, and that towards the end of her writing Nana, she would collapse, get up and start drawing, and then collapse again. You can even see in the final few author comments at the back of each volume where she describes how desperate she was to get through this. How in one she was talking about hoping that her hospital appointment will go well, only to find out in the next one that her condition had gotten much worse. And outside of that, in every interview I found of her from the 15 years she's been away, at the end she always mentions that she intends to return someday as soon as her health gets better, and that she's sorry. The latest one coming in 2022, where she did an art exhibition showing off all her different manga, where she simply apologized for not being able to finish the story that she loves so much. And all of this is to say that she is not one of those authors that don't care about her characters. She views them as real actors that she loves, something she's reiterated numerous times. And the more I heard about this, the more I started to become more at peace with the idea that my favorite series is never going to return. I'm pretty fucking used to it at this point. Being a mangaka is already one of the most taxing jobs on the planet, and then there are people like Yazawa who put so much detail and thought into their stories that they are literally killing themselves to bring the characters to life. But going back to what the message of Nana is, it was the line after apologizing that really made me emotional and see this series in another light. It has been almost 40 years. I was surprised. Since I became a manga artist, I have been running with all my heart and soul every day. I'm sorry that I couldn't finish Nana and collapsed, but I don't regret the days where I continued to draw so passionately. I think if I hadn't done that, none of my works would have been born. And after hearing that, it's hard to not see the idea of suffering so much in the process of creating something, but still finding so much passion and beauty within it, not radiate throughout the entirety of Nana. Because Nana isn't just a story about the cruelty of people, but one about the beauty you can find in them. And I actually think the answer to the question of what Aizawa wants us to take away and her underlying message is the very same answer to Naoki's second question. And I know I've probably mentioned Naoki more than I should in a Nana video, but trust me, I'm going somewhere with this, so just bear with me. After the question asking us if Haruko is real or not, he says that he has everything he's ever wanted: fame, money, girls, etc., but that he still feels so empty. And with that he wishes he can experience real love. But because he's been around people like Takumi for so long, he knows that people lie all the time, so he never truly knows what's real or fake. And he's right, there's no real way to know if somebody's lying about their emotions because we can never see what's really in their head. So instead, he asks another question. Even if you can't tell if it's false, if you believe in it enough, can it be love? What do you think? And the answer to that question is yes. If you loved them and believed it was real, then no matter what, that love remained true to you. And it's the result of that ability to truly love that gives birth to the beating heart in Nana's story, Nana and Hachi's relationship. I feel like I've been babying Hachi this entire video, and you're probably right because I love her, but the truth is that Hachi is far from perfect. She runs away a lot from her problems, and no, I'm not talking about the time Shoji cheated on her. She is very valid for that, obviously, but a better example would be prior to him actually cheating. she consciously runs away from the uncomfortable tension building between her and Shoji in Tokyo. She runs away from Nobu and his feelings throughout the stories, and even Nana constantly hiding details from her out of this shame she has about them. But that being said, I say all this to highlight Hachi's main defining trait, the ability to never let go. Hachi, through all the bad shit she goes through, always comes back, remaining firm and never losing the one thing that's most valuable to anybody, the will to improve and be better. Whilst Nana's possessive nature has her constantly running away from her problems and things that she can't control, like her relationship with Ren and later Hachi, leading to this constant self-sabotage. Nana has this all or nothing mentality where if someone can't give 100% of themselves to her, then she'd rather cut that relationship off entirely. In other words, a very severe case of avoidant attachment. A style of attachment characterized by emotional distance, self-reliance, and discomfort with closeness. All of this clearly stemming from her past of being abandoned by her mum, and I think that's a part of why she doesn't want Hachi to have a child, because it parallels that same event for her. And it's because of that fear of trusting others that she latches so desperately onto her pride and ego. She cares so much about playing into an idea that in turn she can't bring herself to open up and be emotionally honest to Hachi or anybody else that's important to her, except for a very select few moments. And I think that's why I found Nana to be so relatable. I was also that person once upon a time, and to an extent still kind of am, because I couldn't know for sure what they're thinking. I've been hurt before and I don't want to be hurt again, instead preferring to just run away. And I feel like that's a feeling a lot of people relate to. You don't want to take that risk and be vulnerable, because if you can't play into that image of who you want to be, then you just feel pathetic and you run. But like Nana, it's because I have those people willing to go out of their way to push past this barrier that I have, that I was able to understand myself and try to change. So in a sense, I was saved. I spent so much of this video trying to make Nana out to be this cautionary tale, but I actually think it's a heroic one. A story about a hero trying to save somebody who needs saving. And that person is not Nana, but Hachi. Hachi is the hero of this story because of the courage and bravery she has to keep loving and showing her love, and you can see the effect it has on people. However, to the surprise of many, my favorite example of this has to be Shoji. Yuzawa does this really funny thing with Shoji, where when he's a part of the story and cheats on her, he's the worst person in the world, we all hate him. But when we meet more people and you look back on Shoji, he's just kind of tame. Which is kind of insane to say, but that's just the story Nana is. Even Yuzawa starts treating him like a meme that makes a cameo in the story every now and then, until we finally get his last appearance where he randomly runs into Hachi at their favourite burger place. It starts out all funny and stupid with them bickering back and forth, but towards the end, Shoji looks at her with this deep and genuine sadness, apologizing for his actions, and Hachi looks back at him with an almost identical expression, and it's like they're both genuinely aware that this is it. This is the final time you're looking at someone you genuinely once loved, and to an extent still do, before they both tearfully go their separate ways, Shoji reuniting with Sachiko and holding her hand smiling, whilst Hachi sits all alone crying on the bench. This moment is so important to me because it could have easily been a bitter relationship, but the ability to reach out to somebody amidst the pain and regret leaves them with the fondness for those memories they shared. And I think it's that ability that Hachi has to constantly reach out that's what genuinely changes people. Shin finally being able to be the child he deserves to be, those small and blissful memories she spent with Nobu, and all of this builds up to the most important effect she's had on somebody, Nana. The climax of their relationship, in my opinion, takes place after Hachi decides to go with Takumi to raise the child. Nana is at Nobu's place and says to Shin that she never wants to hear Hachi's name again, having felt so betrayed and hurt by everything that had happened with her and Takumi. And I think at this moment she was really going to do it. She was going to completely cut off Hachi. She wanted nothing to do with somebody that was going to keep hurting her. And that would have genuinely been it, the end of their relationship. Until, as she goes back to that 707 apartment with Ren, she finds a letter from Hachi saying that no matter what happens, no matter how many things change, she will always love her and Nana will always be her hero. And what's funny about this is the difference in reaction between Ren and Nana to this letter. Nana is on the floor crying and Ren is baffled. Baffled at the fact that this isn't a goodbye letter but more of a declaration of love. And he's there to remind her that she has to reach back out to Hachi, because that's what heroes do. And to me, this is the main thing I took away from Nana, and I think you should too. And even if we never get an ending, even if worse, it stopped on such a better note, the message of constantly being able to love and help others, no matter what harsh experiences you go through, is something that will stay with me forever, and I hope it will stay with you too. And because of that, the fact that Hachi will continue to love no matter what, I like to think that the ending we would have got was Hachi saving Nana one last time. Actually, no, I'm pretty confident that's the ending we would have got. Nana can be a cruel, cruel story, but it's because it can be so cruel that those beautiful moments shine so brightly. The love between Hachi and Nana radiates throughout the entire story, and ultimately Nana is a story that tells you the importance of the ability to keep loving no matter what. And I've gone on and on and on for way longer than I should have, but all of this can be summarized in my favorite quote throughout the entire series. And that's the quote I want to end this video on.
Hey Hachi, no matter how much or how often people hurt each other, loving someone is never a waste. That love letter you left for me back then, I still cherish it.
And yeah, as usual, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to help this small little channel grow. And also, sorry if this video feels a bit drawn out, but trust me, this is the short version. I had an entire section on Yasu that I had to cut because I was actually going insane editing this. So because of that and the fact that in the process of making this, I realized that I really love doing this and would love to make even better videos about the things I love. I decided to start a Patreon where I'll be posting the stuff that I cut, behind the scenes, editing tutorials, mini reviews about series that I like on the side, as well as a Discord that should be up by the end of the week. So if you are interested in any of that, please consider checking it out. The link will be in the description. And last but not least, DLWLRRMA on Reddit. I don't know who you are, but God bless you. Thank you for being a free ISL Wikipedia page. You saved me so much time. Thank you once again. And with all that out the way, I hope you live a long, happy life, my friends.